Welcome to the Doofcast, the official variety podcast of doofmedia.com. My name is Scott Daly, and this is my co-host, the one and only Matt Freeman.
All right, let's do this one last time. My name is Matt Freeman. I was bitten by a radioactive microphone, and for 10 years, I've been the one and only podcast man. I'm pretty sure you know the rest. I've talked in people's ears a lot, fell in love with a book, talked in people's ears again.
What about that one time with the
We don't talk about that.
Okay. This week on the show, it is another one of our Council of Doof episodes. Matt, what are these all about?
Well, once a month, those individuals that donate to us on Patreon at the Doof Warrior level or above, our Council of Doof, will get to collectively decide on a movie for the community to consider for entrance into the canon. Scott and I then maybe some guests meet, talk about the movie, and then present our case for why it should or should not be admitted.
But as always, we leave the final decision up to you, our listeners. You will be able to vote as soon as you finish listening to this episode over on our Patreon account. The vote is not restricted to just patrons. It's open to everyone, but we host the vote on Patreon. So all you need to do is create a free account and you can vote. So do that. And so stick around, listen to our arguments. Please listen to us before you vote. Maybe. You don't have to. Obviously, we can't stop you. But I'm asking you.
Yeah. Please?
Yeah, and then find the link in the show notes and cast your vote. Matt, what has the council brought to us this month?
The council has nominated the 2018 film Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
All right, I'm going to vote yes. Matt?
I see in the script you've written yes also for me to say.
That's the joke. You're ruining the joke.
We didn't discuss this, Scott.
Okay, then, that's all the time we have for you this week on the Doofcast. See, it doesn't work anymore, Matt, because you didn't say yes.
Oh, goodness gracious. All right.
The trials and tribulations of podcasting and making a script 20 minutes before you have to record the episode.
It happens.
Anyway, let's talk about the movie, Matt. Let's talk about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. We're going to do that, and then I think I just have some, what I've been watching, it's not really a pandemic update. It's just I've been watching a lot of stuff, and I thought I'd talk about some of it at the end of the show for fun. I don't know.
Yeah,
we're loose here on the Doofcast.
Yeah, that sounds good. I want to hear about all the stuff that you've been watching.
All right, let's talk about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
In your universe, there's only one Spider-Man. But there is another universe. It looks and sounds like yours, but it's not. My name's Miles Morales.
Hey, kid. You're like me.
How?
I knew my day would come around this time.
I know it's complicated.
Just had to get my soul and free my mind.
You want to know what happened to you? I can teach you to be Spider-Man. I love this burger. It's so delicious. One of the best burgers I've ever had. You have money, right? I'm not very liquid right now.
I think you're gonna be a bad teacher.
So, Matt, what is this movie about?
Teen Miles Morales becomes Spider-Man of his reality, crossing the path with 5 counterparts from other dimensions to stop a threat for all realities.
Yes, this is the animated film by Sony Animation. I believe that's the name of the company. It was written by Phil Lord and Rodney Rothman. It was directed by Rothman, Peter Ramsey, and Bob Persichetti. I don't know how directing in animated films work. I just know animated films usually have a bunch of directors, so I just assume it's very heavy on needing directors. I'm not an expert on how division of duties works in animated films, but this has the distinction of being not only the only good comic book film to come out of Sony in a long, long time, but probably one of the best Spider-Man films. And I here's what I want to do with this conversation, Matt. I think this movie's been talked about a lot, right? Yeah. And so I don't want to spend the whole runtime talking about how incredible the animation is. First of all, I am not an expert at animation at all. I can talk to you about animating on 2s versus animating on 3s. I can talk to you about how Miles was animated to run at a lower frame per second early in the movie and was actually sped up to 24, or I think it was 24, by the end to make him seem more in sync as he's kind of found himself. We can talk about all these things, but I feel like other people do that better. like a lot better. And so I don't want to focus our talk on that. I think we can talk about the ways in which we found the animation beautiful and led to excellent storytelling, but I don't want to just be like, this is all the cool animation trivia, because other people have done that better, for sure.
Makes sense to me.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't think I have any comparative advantage in talking about animation.
Yeah.
I don't really know, like you just said, very much about it. I can talk about how it made me feel, obviously, and how much I like the movie. But yeah, so what did you want to focus on, though?
I wanted to really dive into the story and the kind of the structure of the story and the ways in which I think this is a very well done movie in that regard. Because even if you set aside the beautiful animation, like, I think this is just a very well told story. I think, Phil Lord and Chris Miller, they both produced this movie. Phil wrote it, but they both produced it together. And these guys are like known in the industry as being like just like the master, like, to a story structure nerd like me and you. They're the superheroes of this industry because they take movies that shouldn't work, like the Lego movie, like 21 Jump Street. These movies that they're like, why are you making this movie? This sounds like a bad idea. And they take those ideas and they make them work. And they do it by just creating a very well constructed, very emotional, very effective story. Yeah. And I think they took that to this movie, because when I think about this movie, setting aside how beautiful and unique it looks, I think it's just telling a story very well, like just structurally very well. It's not doing anything crazy with the story structure. It's I think a very traditional kind of story structure that just is very effective. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I don't remember if we've really done a deep dive on any Lord Miller movies in the past. So
I don't think so.
So, if not, I guess in either case, it might be good to kind of talk about their, what their shtick is, right? Because I agree completely. It's like every movie of theirs that you go see, you're just, you're going to have a great time. You're going to be delighted. You're going to laugh. You're going to maybe cry. And it's going to be maybe not one of your favorite movies in the world, but it's going to be one of your like, oh yeah, that's a really good movies.
Sure, sure.
And this is of course no exception. In fact, I would say this is probably one of their better ones. I don't actually have a list of their movies open in front of me, but I'd probably stand by that though.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is one of those weird movies, and I think you and I are no strangers to this based on our Worm podcast. But a lot of times when you hear about people like talking about something glowingly, you get a little skeptical. Like, I mean, like, and I think that's one of the things that's happened with this movie. People like this, everybody loves this movie, right? Like, greatest comic book movie ever, best movie ever, one of my favorite movies. Like, these are things that people say when they're talking about this movie. And even me, like, when I approached this to do a show on it, knowing that I loved the movie, knowing that I agreed that it belonged on the list of one of the best movies of the decade, I was still like, but is it that good? I mean, come on. I know it's good, but like, is it that good? And I guess I revisited it and I watched it twice in preparation for this show. And it's pretty fucking good, Matt. It's pretty fucking good.
Yeah. So this is my problem. My problem when people start talking up Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is I start going like, yeah, it's not as good as Spider-Man 2. And the thing is, I think I've eventually gotten over this because I'm the one of the few areas in life where I am not above my like being a terrible fan is that I love the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, and I love Spider-Man 2 in particular, and I will fight you. And I think I'm getting better though, because like obviously this is a great movie. I don't really want to compare this movie to that one. I think that like they're just both really good movies. They're actually very similar too. In certain regards. I mean, they're obviously very different also, but I think that the one thing that's true about both of them and the thing that makes them so good is that they both have a huge amount of heart. Which, is sort of a buzzword, but basically just means like the thing Lord and Miller are really good at, like making like rooting you in the characters before crazy stuff starts happening, and then all of the crazy stuff continues to be rooted in character, and the struggle and the conflict of the story is something that plays directly to the struggle of what that character is going on is struggling with on a personal level, and it all works, and it all comes together in the end in a way that's satisfying. Like, that's good storytelling. It's good heart. I'd say most of the other attempts at Spider-Man, and really most like a lot of superheroes in general, superhero movies in general, if they're missing something, it is that heart. And the ones that do have that heart are the ones that we love, So it's kind of Lord and Miller are just really good at nailing that particular aspect of storytelling.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, to go back to what you're talking about Spider-Man 2, as much as I agree with you that I don't want to make this show about comparing those two movies, I am with you on the idea of that's one of my favorite movies of all time. That movie came out at a very important time in my life and kind of defined how I think about myself and how I think about my responsibilities and how I think about the stories and the characters I love. And so it's very hard for another movie to for me to say comfortably that, yeah, this is better. I think if you made me choose, if you Sophie's choiced me on Spider-Man 2 or Into the Spider-Verse, I would probably easily pick Spider-Man 2, and I wouldn't feel too bad about it. But yeah, I agree that doesn't take anything away from this movie, and I do love living in a world in which we can focus more on the similarities and the things that work wonderfully about both these movies than pitting them against each other in a battle royale or anything like that.
Well, I will say one of the things about this movie that immediately took down my guard was when they pay very explicit homage to Spider-Man 2.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, you recognize, okay, good. We can be friends now. I thought that was really, I thought that was fun. They didn't have to do any of that where they make all these references to the other movies. I thought it worked beautifully. I love that.
I agree. And I think it I think it was either Lord or Miller that just tweeted about this not a week ago or so, that they had to fight really hard to get those scenes in the movie. I don't know why. I don't understand. I don't know enough about the inner workings of the business to know why that was such a difficult venture to get those scenes in the movie, but it's something they really wanted to do. I think a lot of this movie is playing off the idea of there being a lot of Spider-Man movies. This is a movie that is fully aware of the fact that there have been 3 different versions of Spider-Man outside of this one in the last 2 decades. And it is playing off that fact. And if you look at what this movie is, I think that this movie is okay, we've done Spider-Man. What can we do now? And then it's also addressing the idea of how do you make a Spider-Man movie without Peter Parker? Which is something a lot of people said. A lot of people out there were even though there's plenty of other Spider-Mans in the comics, there has been forever, but there's this perception that you cannot make a movie without Peter Parker in it. And this movie confronts that directly and says, well, there's nothing about Spider-Man that is Peter Parker. Peter Parker is a character. Miles Morales is a character, and they are both different characters, but they can both be Spider-Man. I think the explicit message of this movie is anyone can wear the mask. You just have to be you have to have the traits of Spider-Man are a person that always gets back up. A lot of this is explicit, right? That understands great power, great responsibility, that does the right thing, that puts others before themselves, and that always gets back up. And that is completely independent from Peter Parker as a person.
Yeah, right. Sure. I mean, that's why they have Peter Parker be his mentor, right? It's
right.
There's so many clever things they do there, right? Just one of them is explicitly referencing the other movies, but this is basically this Peter Parker is basically the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, right? He's
yeah. Well, I don't it's weird because the one at the opening of the scene that we saw the cuts from. From the Raimi Spider-Mans was the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Spider-Man that dies at the beginning of this movie.
Yeah.
And so that's definitely not Tobey Maguire. This one seems more Tobey Maguire-ish in that it's years later. It's about as many years later as it would have gone by had the saga started at the Tobey Maguire movies. But I don't know. And it doesn't have to be explicit, I just like that it's kind of just out there.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't need it to be explicit, but the fact that he's there being the wise mentor and handing off the torch in a way that felt very satisfying. And I mean, he's his own character too. That's probably one of my favorite things about the movie, actually, is yeah, the movie's about Miles Morales, but like a very major character in this story is the older Peter Parker, who's, you know, he has his own arc in this movie. You know, even Gwen Stacy has her own little arc in this movie. She starts out feeling a certain way. She undergoes change. She leaves feeling a different way. She leaves, you know, sort of believing different things about the world and who she is. And it's really done with really very little actual dialogue. But I think it's pulled off perfectly.
Yeah, it's so economical. And if I have a complaint about anything in this movie, it's that I wish there was time for the other three characters to get that. Like, I think the movie underserves those characters. And I know, like, it's just an equation of time, right? Like, you don't have an infinite amount of time. And spending more time on any of those other three characters would have taken away time from Miles Morales or from Fat Peter. And like, I would be, if they had done that, I would be like, well, I wanted more Miles and I wanted more Peter, which is totally unfair of me, but I do wish the movie was able to do a little more something with those guys. Because there's this big scene at the end of the movie where Penny Parker is like mourning her dead robot, and I'm just like, I get it, but also you've done nothing to set this up for me. And I mean, maybe it's literally just like something there for the people that have read the comics of that version of the character that know, like, we really get a throwaway line like, this is her dad's dead robot and her father was the person she lost, because every one of these characters is a person they lost. And so I think there's enough there for you to make connections, but not like to understand why it's an emotional scene, but not enough to where you feel any of the emotion.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny because I had almost exactly the same nitpick watching it through this time, and it wasn't something where I was like, "Oh, this sucked." It was more just like, I think this movie runs right up against the limit of what you might call overstuffed. But like, if they did throw in a little bit more of backstory for Noir Spider-Man or whatever, then I would have been like, all right, that's this too much. You've tipped over the edge. Right. I'm now like, I'm less invested in the stuff I should be invested in because you have overdone it. But they didn't do that. I think the casualty of that is that in order to stay within a reasonable runtime, you are going to have some of those moments where, like, it just doesn't necessarily land for everyone. What's interesting is something I wanted to talk about, actually, is that I watched this. Actually, the first time I saw this, I took my kids to the theater to see it. And it's like one of the few superhero movies that they've actually seen in the theater, and they loved it. I think that they might have gotten lost toward the end when there started to be all the floating around in the collider, because like,
that's a lot. There's a lot on the screen.
Yeah, there's a lot on the screen, and I don't think the concept of like stuff is morphing in from other dimensions is something that makes sense by itself, like automatically. And the movie doesn't explain it, because I think everyone our age is just like, sometimes shit morphs in from other dimensions. It's a thing. But no, I don't think they got that. I think we did watch it again this last week, of course, to prepare for this podcast, and I think that they actually got it a lot better because I don't know. I think that's just the kind of like once you see it a few times, you're like, okay, yeah, I get it. It's a thing. But the point is, the point of bringing up my kids is like, I think moments like that, moments like what was her name? The anime Spider Girl,
Penny
Parker. I think that might work pretty well on kids, actually, because they are not really connecting to like the complicated dramatic stakes that are being laid out over the course of the movie. If they are, they're doing it subconsciously. I think they are connecting, but subconsciously. But stuff like that, I think little moments like that actually work pretty well on kids. So I'll say that for it, at least. Sure.
Yeah, and despite this nitpick, I think the weird thing is I don't want the solution to be, well, if you don't have enough time for them, just take them out of the movie. Because I do think the fact that there's so many Spider-Man people here is important to what the film is trying to do and what the film is trying to say. Because like first of all, this idea that no, you're not alone. This idea that you just, anyone can get the mask, anyone can be Spider-Man. Like all of us can. Like I think Mary Jane Watson's eulogy for this world's Spider-Man before Miles is basically a way to encapsulate the themes of the movie, where she says, my favorite thing about Peter is that he made us each feel powerful. We all have powers of one kind or another, but in our own way, we are all Spider-Man, and we're all counting on you. And that's like why I love superhero stories generally. And that's the theme of this movie, is that like we are all Spider-Man. We all have our own unique powers, and we just need to be able to, we need to embrace them. We need to get past the great expectations that people have for us and just find ourselves. And I think it's wonderful. I think it's wonderful the way in which the film communicates that theme.
Yeah. Exactly. I think that ties in really well to what we were saying a bit ago about this being very much like Spider-Man 2, where it's really fundamentally about Peter Parker or Miles Morales. It's about the character. It's about this person who feels overwhelmed by what is being thrust upon them. You know, in Spider-Man 2, he's already had his origin story, but Spider-Man 2 is actually the story where he's so overwhelmed by the burden of being Spider-Man that he loses his powers, and there's there's a big chunk of the movie where he's just walking around enjoying not having powers and enjoying being a normal person. And like it's you know, what an interesting choice to make for a superhero movie, right? But this movie, it also deals with the same thing, where this kid he didn't ask for this. He's not like excited about it. He doesn't think it's awesome. He doesn't even get the scene where he like tries to use it to win some money. He basically practically never gets anything good out of it. It just kind of goes from like he gets the powers to immediately being like a burden for him.
Right.
Which I think that actually gets you on his side like immediately.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of how this is a Miles Morales movie as much as it is a Spider-Man movie, I think I love that that idea, this idea that all the stuff is being thrust on this kid, and he's just doesn't have the confidence to embrace it, and he's afraid of it. I think we set that up before he's even Spider-Man, right? Before he's even been bitten by a spider. We have this beautiful opening where the movie starts out and he's listening to music, and these little tiny little detail touches that I just love, Matt, where he's listening to the music and he's singing along, but he can't remember all the lyrics of the song, and so it's kind of jerky, and that goes into the fact that he's animated at 12 frames, so his movements kind of jerky, kind of out of sync, at less smooth than everything else around it. Then he goes to school and he walks through his old neighborhood first, and everyone's it goes almost above and beyond to show how well respected and well loved he is in this lane. In this one lane he's in, everyone likes him, all these people are his friends, everything's going great. And then he gets to his new school and he's the awkward one out. He's trying to joke around with people and nothing's happening. He doesn't fit in at all. And he's trying to fail out purposefully because he's not ready for this, because everyone has these great expectations for him and he's just not ready for it. I mean, I keep saying great expectations because that's the book they're reading, and that's the like the symbolism is really clear here. I think it's really wonderful. Like he makes the no expectations graffiti on the wall when he gets bit by the spider. And it's real, like the way this movie communicates those themes is really great. And this is before he's even Spider-Man, right? And then it takes this concept. This concept of him not fitting in, of being so terrified of not living up to his parents' expectations of him that he'd rather just go back to the way things were, back to his safe environment, back to where everything was okay. And then this great power is thrust upon him, and he can't do that. Like I love the one of the first things he says when he sees Peter Parker, and Peter Parker, like the blonde Peter Parker, and he realizes you're like me, you're like me, and he says, I don't want to be, and Peter's like, I don't think you have a choice in that, and that's wonderful. It's because that basically encapsulates the entire arc of Spider-Man 2 in a line. Yeah. And I'm not saying that wasn't an arc that needed to be explored. Like we said, that's my favorite movie ever. But the arc of that movie is that you can't help this. This has happened now, and all you can't run away from it. You have to embrace it. You have to believe in yourself. You have to stand up. Yeah. You have to get up. That's what you got to do. Right. You got to take that leap of faith. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I love it. It is funny how I watched Spider-Man 2 in the last week also, just because it was on my mind so much having watched this movie. And it was funny to me, especially this time, how much like Aunt May's big rousing speech in that movie is basically like, sometimes you have to give up your dreams and do the thing you're supposed to do.
Yeah,
And it's like, holy shit. Like that's not usually the lesson that we're teaching in these movies, but like maybe it's a lesson some people need to hear actually.
Yeah.
And of course in that movie it's interesting because Peter does sort of end up getting what he wants, but but then the movie ends on this like minor key of Mary Jane watching him swing away and leaving her, right? So it's like it's not perfect. It can never be perfect. You can never really get exactly what you want when you have these responsibilities. And this movie it does leave Miles in this place where he's accepting the burden, even though he's still at the school where he doesn't really fit in, and it's scary, and the bad things have happened.
And the road's not going to be easy. I mean, I think that's like, being a hero is hard. Doing the right thing is hard. Yeah. That's what this movie is about. Doing the right thing is always hard, and it's exhausting. Like, I can't tell you how many times someone looks at one of the spider people and is like, "You look tired," or I like Peter Parker at the beginning when he's fighting Goblin. He's like, "I am so tired."
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's just it's exhausting, but someone's got to do it, like I don't know. Like, I think that's inspiring to me. That's why I love superhero stories, because it's a person that is gifted with this incredible gift and chooses to do the right thing and chooses to use that thing to help other people, even though it might mean that they don't get what they want, that they're having to sacrifice the things that they want for the sake of other people. I don't know. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think that does, like, both movies really come together in that regard. And I swear to God, we're not going to spend this whole thing talking about Spider-Man 2. It's just that we both really love that movie.
Yeah. Well, I see it. Honestly, like, I see it as a big compliment just because it is one of my favorite movies. Mm-hmm. I feel like I've meandered a lot in this conversation. Did you have any like specific story structure things that you had in mind to pull out?
I mean, there are a lot of 3 beats in this movie that I think really effectively communicate Miles' growth throughout the movie. Like, there's this recurring beat with his shoelaces, and we see that basically everyone is telling Miles that his shoes are untied, and he keeps saying, "Yeah, it's a choice. Like, I'm making a statement." But he also keeps tripping over himself. Like, at the very beginning of the movie, he jumps up in the air to stick a sticker on the street sign or the stop sign, and then he comes back down and he trips and falls. He trips over his shoelaces and falls. And then later in the story, after he's Spider-Man, when he does that wonderful like montage where he climbs up the top of the building and is going to jump off and then get scared, and God, the editing and the music in this movie really help sell the humor sometimes, where it's like it cuts to there's this big powerful dramatic music and then cuts to him in silence running back down the stairs because he's too afraid, and then looking at a much shorter building and then running up the stairs in the shorter building. Anyway, when he jumps off that building, the reason he falls is because he trips on his shoelaces again. Mm-hmm. And so it's like it's this choice that he's making to trip himself up. Mm-hmm. And then the moment at the end of the movie when he has, painted the Spider-Man suit black with the spray paint, and he's out there, he's still wearing shoes in that scene, but they're tied now. The laces are tied. And I was trying to pay special attention to it, and there's times when it's hard to see, but then the movie does that part where it throws down the comic book cover on top of the other stack of comic book covers, and his shoelaces are very visible in that scene, and they're clearly tied. They're loose tied, but they're clearly tied. And I think that's like he's finally stopped making a statement, and he's finally done something for himself to stop tripping himself up. Like he was intentionally making choices that were tripping himself up, and he's finally learned to stop doing that. He's finally learned to have confidence in himself, to embrace who he is. Like again, like the artwork is such a beautiful metaphor for Miles being Miles, and like the only time we see him really do art is like hidden in this subway where no one can see. And the big moment of the story is when he throws the art book outside his window. And of course, older Peter catches it and throws it back in. But that's like him rejecting what makes him Miles. And he eventually learns to embrace that. And that's why I think the part at the end of the movie where his dad agrees to give him a wall at the police station to do art on is a perfect encapsulation of their relationship coming together.
Yeah, that's great. I don't think I definitely hadn't put together the idea of the shoelaces. I mean, you definitely noticed the shoelaces as a thing, but I didn't put it together as the metaphor of self-sabotage, basically.
Yeah.
Which is something that he totally is doing consistently toward the beginning. Like you just mentioned, he's, intentionally failing tests because he doesn't want to be there anymore. He doesn't want to have this pressure put upon him. And so he's doing all kinds of things to subtly sabotage his chances at succeeding. And
running away with his uncle, who's the only person that understands him, who happens to be a bad guy, which is another perfect way of visualizing this running away from responsibility by running to the guy who has who is a criminal, who is a villain. It's perfect. And like at the beginning of the movie, he can't communicate with his father, and he runs to his uncle for help, and he loses his uncle and gets closer to his dad. And I think there's some weird moments in this movie where I wonder if some stuff got cut out, because I still don't really understand why his father is down at the bottom of Kingpin's tower and in the middle of all that stuff. That felt a little clunky of the cause and effect chain that led him down into the basement of this facility while this big crazy thing is going on. I mean, I know they technically show he's standing near the building and he sees stuff going off, but I feel like there was just a couple scenes that chained those together a little bit better. But it is I'm so happy he's there. I'm not complaining that he's there. I just didn't think the movie set up well enough that he's there, and I wonder if a scene was cut. But I guess I want to talk about his relationship with his dad, because I think that's another wonderful little 3-beat.
Yes,
there.
sure. I mean, the dad, just the whole presence of the dad in the story is one of my favorite things about it. It's just it's fantastically honest and real feeling dad energy relationship.
Yeah. And the 3-beat I'm talking about is the I love you 3-beat, where at the very beginning of the movie, his dad says, as he's dropping him off for school, he says, I love you. And he makes him say it back to him. And then when he's waiting outside his door where Miles is all webbed up, he says, I love you. You don't have to say it back. And then the final beat at the end of the movie is Spider-Man saying, I love you to his dad, with unprompted, right? The first one, he makes him. The second time, he's not going to make him. And this time it's unprompted. And I just, that's perfect. That's perfect story structure. And that's you might not even consciously notice that that's what the movie's doing, but it helps you feel the shift that's happening.
Yeah.
And I just there's so many moments like that throughout this movie, so many little things like that I think go to create the really just satisfying story.
Yeah. Yeah, not just that, but also the idea that his dad doesn't like Spider-Man because his dad's a cop and doesn't like the vigilante aspect. It's they don't waste a single line of the movie, right? There's nothing in this movie that's just oh yeah, that's just there for characterization. No. I mean, yes, it's there for characterization, but it's also setting this thing up, and it's establishing this dynamic between these two characters that's going to then pay off in this way later. That's the thing that makes it a masterclass is think of how much stuff happens in this movie. It's incredibly just tight. It is something to be studied. That's one reason why I think talking about it for a Doofcast is actually somewhere between intimidating and impossible, because I'm this is the kind of movie where you could literally do 10 minute at a time. You talk about it for an hour or two.
Yeah, I could talk about every frame of this movie.
Yeah,
for 100%.
Yeah, you can talk about every choice of how they chose to frame it, what imagery they're using, the exact lines, what each line is doing, the voice acting. It's that kind of movie. And many movies are that tightly made, but this is just one where it's fast paced and tightly made, and thus you're just oh God, where do you even start with this?
Yeah, I mean, speaking of individual frames that communicate so much, when they first go down inside Peter Parker's hidden base under Aunt May's house, and Miles looks at the Spider-Man costume, And it's this beautifully constructed scene where you see Miles' face reflect off the glass in front of the costume, and he's like 2 feet too short.
Yeah.
Like his face does not line up with the mask at all. And then when he returns back down there to get the costume to spray paint it, it recreates that same shot, except his face perfectly lines up with the eye holes of the mask. And that's like, that communicates so much in just that shift, right? And like logically, I don't know how that happened, because like, did he get taller? and this is the cool thing that I think animation can do, is they've just constructed the scene where it doesn't matter. Like the emotional point of that is conveyed there, and you're just like, "Yup, awesome, great, love it."
Exactly. Yeah, I don't think the conscious part of your mind notices that unless you're looking for those kinds of tricks.
Yeah,
good point.
Yeah, and I love. We kind of touched on older Peter, but I think his story is really interesting in the way it kind of echoes off of Miles as well, because he's a person that has kind of. It's interesting because he's still Spider-Man, and he's still being Spider-Man. So he hasn't abandoned those responsibilities, but he has abandoned his responsibilities to his wife. And I think he's also afraid of stepping up. Like, we learn that the reason why him and MJ split up is because he was too afraid to have kids.
Yeah.
She wanted kids, and it's not that he didn't want them. It's that he was too afraid. He was too afraid of that kind of responsibility and what that meant and what that entailed. And he's afraid to step up. And that's why he loses her. And so it's this wonderful thing where the mentor and the mentee are kind of teaching each other the same lesson at the same time, which is wonderfully capped by the movie, like recreating the leap of faith moment with sending old Peter back home. It's just perfect.
Yeah, I love that. I like that, Miles, he's not only struggling with being Spider-Man, but he's struggling with this kind of, with his relationship with his dad, which I think is really cool, because that is not part of the Spider-Man mythos, right? Spider-Man has Aunt May, who is sort of like, oh, I'm Aunt May, and like, she's not reliable, right? She's not a sturdy presence. Whereas Miles, he has his dad. His dad is a police officer. His dad is kind of awesome, actually. His dad is drawn in this way where he's like an enormous hulking. This is one thing I've started to notice more recently about movies, is that they tend to animate, like, if there's a dad, like if your movie is about the kid and there's a dad, the dad will be like basically 8 feet tall and 300 pounds of muscle, which you don't even notice it as being weird, because like you are empathizing with the kid, and dads are enormous when you're a kid.
Sure.
Dads are larger than life. And so the dad characters are always larger than life. And so his dad is this larger than life presence, but he's having this, this conflict, this alienation, this distance, this lack of ability to communicate and see eye to eye with his dad. And that is connected to Peter Parker's alienation from Mary Jane. It's kind of their important person who they either look up to or care about, the most, let's say.
Sure.
And so those two struggles are mirrored, and as Miles learns on his own that he needs to reach out to his dad, that his dad has his own problems, and he needs to kind of change how he's thinking about this relationship. Miles is able to then impart that lesson on Peter, and it's gorgeous. I love so much. I love it so much.
Yeah, and we get the catharsis there at the end, where the movie gives us Peter walking up to MJ's house and ringing the doorbell.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we don't necessarily know how it's going to go. And I love that we kind of leave it that way, because like, that's the way he left it. Like, his last line in the movie is like, how do I know I'm not going to screw it up again? And it's like, you don't know that.
Yeah.
You just got to take that leap though, man. Just do it.
Yeah.
Just go invisible.
That's why I choose to believe that is actually Tobey Maguire, Peter Parker, and that's the resolution of his character.
Sure.
It fits so well for him.
It does. All right. What else do I want to talk about here? What do you want to talk about, Matt? What have we left out? I kind of want to talk about some of our villains and maybe some of the action, because the action's really good.
Yeah. The villains, for some reason, I think one of my favorite moments in the story, in the movie, which is really a very minor one, is when you think that what you're watching is this interaction between giant scary Kingpin and scientist woman, the sort of befuddled, absent-minded scientist woman who he's browbeaten, and then it transforms in this beautiful like just moment when her tentacles come out, and then you realize how much you've misunderstood the situation. And you're like, that's awesome, because I never would have suspected that this was Doc Ock. Yeah. And now we have to fight Doc Ock. And like, it's also a very cool visual way of doing Doc Ock's power, right? Because it's these cool, like, floppy, but still strong and intimidating tentacles. I just love how that's done in every way.
I am pretty plugged in to the filmmaking world. I read a lot of news. I watch all trailers. This movie's ability to keep Doc Ock secret was incredible. I legitimately don't know how they did it. The fact that nobody knew that she was in this movie was remarkable. Yeah. And the reveal, you're absolutely right, is so perfect. And you'll see, like, on rewatches, there's so many fun details. When she's on the screen in the classroom, it literally says, like, Olivia, and then Miles is standing in front of the last part of her name on the screen, so you can't see it says Octavius there. And if you look, like, you see the O, like it says Olivia O, and then Miles is there, and you can't see the rest of it. So it's like they didn't even cheat; they just like blocked it smartly. Like it's just like there's so many details here. Yeah, I mean it's a wonderful moment. I love this movie's take on Dr. Octopus. I think it's so I think what you need to do is do exactly what Peter Parker says, which is part of step one in his plan is reconsider his personal biases. When he said, no, she's the one in charge. And he's like, oh, okay. All right. Step one, reconsider personal biases. And then, she's really wonderful. I like Kingpin a lot. And I mean, his design, like this massive, like inhumanly large person is, I think, like just one of those things that that only you can only get away with in animation, like to do it like that. Like he doesn't look like a human being, but it works. That
rendering of Kingpin, like I've seen a bunch of different renderings of Kingpin. The one it reminds me the most of is just like the cartoon Spider-Man from when I was a kid. Right. Except even more so.
Yeah. I guess if I had one quibble about Kingpin, I wish they would have found a way to make the antagonist's story like kind of echo the protagonist's story or mirror it or something, you know, like I guess you could squint at it and be like, Kingpin is trying to pull these people into his world. They're trying to get Spider-Man is trying to get his people home to their worlds. Like, I get that, but I don't think like the thematic resonance of Miles Morales trying to step up and have confidence in himself and be this person is echoed in what Kingpin wants. Which is like one of the most minor quibbles in the world. It's one of the reasons why I'm so much less interested in talking about the villains in this movie. And that's why, because I don't think there's a lot of thematic resonance for Kingpin here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
unless I'm just not seeing it.
Yeah, the closest I can get is like he wants to keep doing what he wants to do, and he also and that choice has alienated his family, but he refuses to accept that. But he also refuses to change who he is.
Sure.
Because like if he had just changed who he was, he wouldn't have lost his family, or rather, if he had not done the terrible things that he was, always wanting to do, and then he continues to be that person, which then just drives them away again when he sees them in the ghost dimension or whatever.
Yeah, I do love the replaying of that beat where the exact same things happens to him again because he can't fucking learn his lesson.
Yeah,
he invests billions of dollars into creating this technology to bring them back, and he loses them the exact same way he did last time because he has learned nothing. Yeah, it's great. Like it's a good arc, or it's not even really an arc. It's a good plot line for the villain. I just like it in a perfect movie. It just pings off the protagonists a little bit more perfectly. Like this is like, I swear to God, this is like the minorest of quibbles. Like this does not even come close to hurting the movie. But I'm just like thinking like, how could this movie be perfect? and I mean, Spider-Man 2, the protagonist and the antagonist,
Yeah,
like
Doc Ock
it mirrored each other perfectly.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
anyway, yeah.
That's interesting. Now I'm trying to imagine if Doc Ock couldn't have been like the protagonist of the movie, and Doc Ock is actually the one who built the quote unquote collider anyway. So why even involve Kingpin? Yeah, I guess. And I almost like my prior is that I am missing something, because if I say why even involve Kingpin, like surely there's a reason, right? Surely there's a storytelling reason why Kingpin was used in the story, rather than it just being, yeah, Doc Ock wanted to bring back her husband who she accidentally killed.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean,
I think the closest thing is that it's the losing a family, where I think I do think that that's where Miles is heading. What you said about that, I think, really does speak to me. That there is kind of a mirroring there of lost family, or like running away from your family, because that's what he's doing in the story. Like he's not talking to his father. Like I love the moment where he's on the train and calls his dad and then hangs up right away, because his dad's just not the person he can talk to about that. And maybe like he loses his family much in the same way Kingpin does if he doesn't find a way to change.
Yeah.
I like that.
I guess speaking of the villains, I think there is one thing that we haven't really gone into, which is probably also worth going into, is, his uncle, the Prowler.
Yeah.
Which is, as far as I can tell, is just an original villain made for either this movie specifically, or at least made for like the Miles Morales continuity. I can't find any like reference to the Prowler outside of Miles Morales content. So,
Prowler is a Spider-Man character,
but is it like a classic one? Like maybe I just was looking in the wrong place.
Yeah. I think they've basically rewritten him from the original version.
Okay.
But yeah, I think he was a character back in the day. 1969 it says here. And they kind of turned him into a Miles Morales specific character.
Very well. No, I see now that I'm wrong. I don't know where I was looking, where it was just like, nope, this is just anyway, point is, this is a really interesting way to go, right? Because it's almost like this is the Uncle Ben, but it's such a radically different approach to that, right? In fact, it's funny. My kids were insisting to me, were literally arguing with me and saying that his name was Uncle Ben, and I'm like, no, he's the uncle. He's Miles's uncle, but his name is not Ben. And they're like, no, he is. I'm like, no, just let's pay attention to what he calls him. But anyway, that's kids for you. But yeah, like he has this close relationship with his uncle that he doesn't really have with his dad. That they seem to be more on the same wavelength, and he can talk to him about stuff. He talks to him about girls and stuff that he's not going to talk to his dad about that. And then finds out that this guy has this terrible side to him. In fact, here's something funny, is that I forgot. I forgot until this rewatch that the Prowler actually shows up during the initial fight, where like it's actually possible that Spider-Man could have gotten away at the beginning of the movie, and then the Prowler kind of catches him and stops him, and then that's so like in a sense, the Kingpin is the one that kills him, but the Prowler is instrumental in that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the Prowler was going to kill him. Like,
yes.
That the scene where Spider-Man dies, which, I mean, let's just say for a moment, this movie opens with fucking killing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Like, Spider-Man dies in this movie. And I think that's the perfect, oh shit, we're doing something here moment.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that the first time I watched it. But yeah, Prowler is walking up to Spider-Man, and like we see this beautiful shot of him like opening his claw to flex it. And then he says, "Don't you want to know what I saw in there?" And that's when Kingpin stops him. And so if he hadn't have said that, would Prowler have been the one to take out Spider-Man? Seems like it.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, when he's picking up Miles and Miles takes off his mask, and then Prowler's ordered to kill him, and he starts putting Miles's mask back on. There was a moment there the first time I watched it where I was like, oh, he's going to fucking kill his nephew. He's
Yeah.
putting the mask back on so he doesn't have to look
Right.
his nephew in the face when he kills him.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he starts to step back and gets punished for it by the villain. But that's a really powerful moment, too. Like, like talk about heart and talk about, pathos. Like, the moment where not only does he realize his uncle, but we get to see his uncle realize it as well. And it's really wonderful. I love it.
Yeah. Well, his his facial expression, it's CGI, but it's like perfect. It's gutting.
Mm-hmm.
But both of them actually, but they both have their masks off, and they're both just devastated by this, but that this terrible thing has happened. For both of them, it's a terrible thing in a sense, right? It's so great. Well, another, just comment about the Prowler character is the terrifying music that accompanies him.
The noise, right?
Yeah.
That like, oh my God.
It's so unsettling. It's so good.
Yeah. It's like inhuman. Like I don't know, like I wouldn't even know what to describe it as. It's just freaky.
Yeah. Yeah. It's this like electronic screeching, right? It's God, yeah. I mean, like just the way he's animated, he's so formidable and I don't know. I love that. I love that, visually portraying the strength of the character.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's wonderful. I guess that's a good segue to kind of talk about the music of this movie, which is really, really, really good.
Yeah.
Not to be a broken record here, but like, it is, not only is it good, but it does this thing where it's unique and you can tell like this is the music for the Miles movie. Like one of the biggest strengths to me is that this is not just a Spider-Man movie. This is a Miles Morales movie. Almost first it's a Miles Morales movie and then it's a Spider-Man movie, which is great because like you were talking about, Spider-Man 2 is a Peter Parker movie primarily and a Spider-Man movie second. That's very important. And so this music is very Miles, but I love like the What's Up Danger song, which is just fucking great.
Yeah.
Has this note in the middle of it that kind of almost sounds to me like the Raimi Spider-Man theme. Like at a point, I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not good at music, but when it gets really triumphant there, there's this little through line that feels that just sounds like Spider-Man to me.
Sure. I'm not sure if I know what you're talking about, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was a reference because composers love to do that stuff.
Sure. And I don't know, like that's like I listen to that song all the time. It's like on one of my top played on my iTunes. But that little uplift, that little triumphant uplift after the first time the chorus goes off is like I get goosebumps listening to it. It's so good, and all the music's good. It's so alive. It's like that's this movie. This movie has so much life to it. It's so it moves. It looks like nothing else. It sounds like nothing else. It feels like nothing else. It's so wonderfully unique in just about every way.
Yeah. I think that's definitely the reason why we couldn't stop talking about it when it came out, and by we I mean society, because because it was like, oh, this is like it's rare and special when there is something that is just this completely fresh. Especially like it seems these days it can start to feel like we've got an embarrassment of riches when it comes to superhero movies, but they have started to fall along very similar lines in terms of plot and visual aesthetic.
Sure. And
so this really is very different in almost every way that you can be while still being a superhero movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I want to leave our conversation, is talking about the ways in which this is truly a comic book movie. This like comic books simulate movement, right? Like it's a static image that gets you to feel like things are moving. And I think this movie takes that and moves the things the ways in which a comic book simulates it. And it's almost it's a comic book come to life in every way, and stylistically, like the animation, the way it feels, it's a comic book come to life. And I mean, I love the touch that like we don't see Miles's internal narrative, like his thoughts in his head don't pop up as text bubbles on the comic page until after he's been bitten. It's almost as like, okay, we've transitioned to a comic book story now.
Right.
And so suddenly the movie becomes way more referential to comics. I think that's a perfect little detail that just, I don't know. It like, and here's where I'm at with voting on it, because like, I want Spider-Man 2 in the canon. Like, if it were up to me, Spider-Man 2. But like, if you're telling me one comic book movie, the term comic book movie can be on this list, and I'm not saying that's the rules, but like, let's pretend that's the rules. If you're telling me that that's true, then I think it makes sense for the comic book movie representative to be a comic book movie in the truest sense of that phrase. Because that's what this is. This is not a movie about a comic book character. This is a comic book made into a movie.
Yeah. I mean, I agree, right? It definitely goes for visual references to comic books very often. And what's funny is so does Spider-Man 2. But
it does. But I mean, I think this embraces it so much more than that.
Well, it Spider-Man 2 like almost can't because it's not animated, and it doesn't do stuff like text boxes and choices like that. I
like Hulk.
I like that. It's funny because I kind of like it's so hard because it's like, why did they have to go and make two really excellent movies both about Spider-Man? Because I do love both of these movies. Like Spider-Man 2 is always going to have a closer place to my heart. So I'm basically like you, where I'm like, how can I just cheat and say that this movie can go in the canon, but that doesn't mean that Spider-Man 2 can't go in the canon later for some different reason. We'll just say Spider-Man 2 goes in there as the one Tobey Maguire movie. How about that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
We get one Tobey Maguire movie, and we get one Spider-Man movie. And it's not our fault if the Tobey Maguire movie just happens to be Spider-Man movie.
There you go.
But what about Pleasantville?
One Sam Raimi movie.
But what about Evil Dead?
One Kirsten Dunst movie.
But what? I could go all day. You better stop.
But what about Melancholia?
Yeah, exactly.
No, I was gonna say no. It's funny because
what James Franco, James Franco movie?
Yeah, James Franco or God, I can't believe I'm blanking on J.J. Jameson's name.
Fuck. This is embarrassing.
Best actor of all time. God, it's.
I have to look it up because it's gonna drive me crazy.
Yeah, no, I know.
So fucking mad at myself.
I can't believe it either. This is terrible. This is the worst thing that's ever happened.
And it's not coming to me. This is the worst audio ever. But
Simmons,
I can't.
J.K. Simmons.
Thank you,
Yeah,
J.K.
I looked
Simmons.
it up.
Dear God.
Yeah, that's what's funny. I actually have noticed, this is a tangent, but I've noticed that I have a really hard time remembering the names of my favorite character actors. Like I routinely blank on Gary Oldman's name. I remembered it this time, but like I blank on Gary Oldman because I just remember the name of the character. Because he's like, well, he's Commissioner Gordon. It's and he's also what's his name, Zorg or whatever. Anyway,
sure.
he's too good, and that's why I can't remember his name, and that's why we can't remember Simmons' name. There you go. It's not our fault. It's because they're so good.
It's not our fault. Speaking of that, though, let's just give a moment for the voice talent in this movie, which is top notch. Jake Johnson playing Peter B. Parker, the fat Parker. Haley Steinfeld playing Gwen Stacy, one of my favorite actors. Mahershala Ali playing Uncle Aaron, Uncle Ben. Brian Tyree Henry playing Jefferson Davis, the Miles' father. It's just Lily Tomlin plays Aunt May. Zoe Kravitz plays Mary Jane. John Mulaney plays Spider-Ham. Nick Cage plays Spider-Man Noir. Catherine Hahn plays Doc Ock. Liev Schreiber plays Fisk. Chris Pine plays the Peter Parker that dies. I mean, this is ridiculous, Matt. It's a stacked cast, and they all do so well. But I think we need to give it up most for Shameik Moore, who plays Miles Morales, because, man, the dude kills it.
Oh, yeah.
Miles is such a, the whole movie's on his back, and he does wonderfully.
Yep. I I don't have anything else to add. Other than like, I think that I was so tickled to remember that it was Nicolas Cage that to my kids, I was like, that's Nicolas Cage. And they were like, Dad,
Who?
we're years away from caring about this. We may never actually. Anyway,
I think my favorite line of the movie might be Nick Cage about to jump into the portal, holds up the Rubik's Cube and says, "I'm taking this. I still don't understand it."
yeah, it's great.
And then, of course, John Mulaney's Spider-Pig saying, "That's all, folks." And then Jake Johnson saying, "Can he say that? Like, legally?" This movie's really funny, too. We haven't talked much about the humor, but it's really funny.
It's another staple of Lord Miller, right?
Yeah.
Everything they do is successfully funny, right? It's and it's different. It's not it's like character centric humor.
Yeah.
Rather than just sort of like cheap gags. I don't know. I love their humor. I love their movies.
It's character centric and it uses everything that the movie has at its disposal. It's not just funny because of what people say, that's the humor we pointed out here because that's the humor you can recreate on a podcast. But like so many of the jokes are visual gags. So many of the jokes are like timing gags, like that fully use the movie frame to tell the joke.
Yeah.
And I think it's really effective that way.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy it.
I mean, stuff like Peter Parker telling the story of his life and then like what's happening on the screen begins to diverge from what he's saying. And like it's sort of heartbreaking, but it's mostly funny actually. Because you're like, oh, okay, he's like doesn't want to admit how far he's fallen. That's good, you know. And that's like you said, using the film correctly to tell the joke.
And he as he's getting sucked up into the portal, he webs his mask and then webs the slice of pizza. And then the portal closes before he gets the slice of pizza, so it sticks to the ceiling. I mean, there's so many, like, I'm serious. We could go through this movie a minute at a time and have something to say, like, easily. It like the attention to detail here, the craft on display. I think, like, we didn't talk much about the animation and we said why, but dude, it's all there. It's all working. It's incredible. I don't have a problem voting yes for this movie. I do think that if someone told me that voting yes for this movie means a no for Spider-Man 2, that would make me hesitate. But I'm going to live in a world in which that's never going to happen, and gladly say yes to Into the Spider-Verse. If this is a movie that can't get in, I don't know what this list is.
Right. Well, you know, Scott, hold on. Let me just briefly take an aside. I'm going to talk to the people who are in charge of defining the list. Hold on. It's us. So, yeah, you know, everybody, this is a great movie. I think that you should vote yes. I also would just love an opportunity to talk about why Spider-Man 2 is great, because like people who love it, and then people who don't love it are usually like, well, why do you love it so much? To them, I say, I'll do a Doofcast and explain that to you.
Sure. I would love to. I would love to talk about why Spider-Man 3 is great.
Sure.
Certainly not nearly as good as Spider-Man 2 or this movie, but better than people give it credit for.
Sure.
That's for sure. We're going to have to do it. You know what we'll do? We'll do a Deconstructing Raimi, and then we'll just get to do all of them.
That's a great idea, actually.
All right. So that is our votes. That's 2 yeses for the two of us. But, Matt, we're only 2 votes of many. So we are now turning it over to you, our listeners, to decide, is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse worthy of getting into the Doof canon, the list of the greatest films ever? You can vote, as we said before, on our Patreon. That's patreon.com/doofmedia. Again, reminder, you do not have to be a patron to vote. You just have to have a Patreon account. I think that's required, because that's how they track to make sure people aren't voting a bunch of times and stuff. So you do not have to be a patron. Just make a Patreon account and click yes, probably, or no. And here's what I'll say. If you're voting no, please let us know why. I really am curious. Like, and I don't want to single anyone out, but I am curious if you look at this movie and say, nah, I'm curious as to why. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying what you're doing is bad. I would just be very curious as a lover of film. Because I don't know. I don't. Are we going to get our first 100% yeses on this? We might. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think people have opinions about this movie, but we'll see, right?
Sure,
We'll see.
sure. Yeah. All right. That's patreon.com/doofmedia. And it should be up. It'll be in the show notes as well, but it should be up by the time you're hearing this.
Doof.
So Matt, I've been watching a whole bunch of things.
Tell me about all the things.
You want to hear about the things?
I like hearing about things, and then I say stuff like, "Yeah, I'll have to check that out."
And then you never do.
Correct.
So last night, my wife and I were looking for a movie to watch, and I noticed there's a movie new to Netflix called, I believe it's called Angel Has Fallen, which is the third movie in the Has Fallen franchise, which is a thing, believe it or not.
Okay.
The second movie was London Has Fallen, and the first movie was Olympus Has Fallen. And when I went to press play on Angel Has Fallen, because I was like, yes, fuck yeah, absolutely, my wife was like, wait a minute, I haven't seen the other two. Let's go watch the first one. So we went back and watched Olympus Has Fallen, which is a 2013 film directed by Antoine Fuqua, starring Gerard Butler, Aaron Eckhart, and Morgan Freeman. The concept is Aaron Eckhart is the president, and Gerard Butler is a Secret Service agent. And then terrorists take over the White House, and he has to save the president. It's basically like I think there was another movie exactly like this that came out almost at exactly the same time. It was one of those like I think it's called White House Down. It has Jamie Foxx and Channing Tatum in it.
Yes, yeah. God, when you were talking, I was like, wait a second.
And both of these movies came out in 2013. It was one of those weird, like, Deep Impact and Armageddon things where two movies about the exact same thing came out at the exact same time. White House Down was a silly movie. It was a silly PG-13 movie. Olympus Has Fallen is an R-rated, fucking crazy-ass movie where Gerard Butler shoots Koreans in the head for 2 hours.
Okay.
And it's, like, psychotic and maybe a little bit racially insensitive, and it gets crazy from there. But here's the thing. Here's what I'll say about it. For all that, it's kind of a fun time. I mean, it's fun action. It's absurd. Like the plot that is hatched to get these people to actually take over the White House is insane. But it's insane in kind of a fun way. And the cast is fun. Aaron Eckhart as the president, who boxes, is always a good time.
This reminds me of like the genre of movie that they don't really make anymore, where I think we're going to go for our second executive decision reference in 2 weeks and just say like the sort of like political action movie. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
At least I haven't seen them in a while.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they made Angel Has Fallen last year, Matt.
But I didn't hear about that.
Of course he didn't. London Has Fallen came out in 2016 and is basically the same thing. Gerard Butler is in London with Aaron Eckhart, the president, still.
Oh my God.
And Morgan Freeman is still the Secretary of State that becomes the president when Aaron Eckhart gets in trouble. And Gerard Butler has to save London and the president.
I literally had no idea that these were a series. I thought they were just like different movies. Okay. Wow. This is amazing. I'm so excited.
And then An Angel Has Fallen, the 2019 movie, Mike Banning, our hero, is framed for the assassination of the president. And he's got to clear his name.
Oh my God.
And Morgan Freeman's in it still somehow.
Hey, just a question. Are these words like the code names of the different characters?
Olympus is like a code name for the White House. So
Okay.
Olympus Has Fallen is like the White House
Gotcha.
has been taken over.
Okay.
And I think after that they just started like I don't know what angel means.
Okay.
London Has Fallen is probably just a play off of like I'm sure the London Bridge is going to collapse or something.
I'm sure.
And
Definitely.
they're because I think I've seen London Has Fallen. I haven't seen Angel Has Fallen. But the point is that I watched the first one and now I'm committed to watching all three of these fucking absurd movies. And that's what the quarantine has done to me, where I'm just like, yeah, why not? Why not?
That sounds great. I envy you.
All right. The next movie I watched, Matt, is a movie called Bad Education. This is an HBO original film starring Hugh Jackman. It's a movie directed by Corey Finley, who also directed a movie called Thoroughbreds that came out a couple of years ago that I really liked. This really kind of strange, like, thriller. Bad Education is a movie based on a true story of a superintendent of a New York school district that like embezzled a shit ton of money, like like the biggest school embezzlement scandal in the history of the country. And this is like the best I've ever seen Hugh Jackman ever.
Okay.
He is incredible in this movie. He's playing this kind of like super confident guy everyone loves, who's always like dressed super sharp, who's like got slick back hair, and like he's just like he's the guy when there's a crisis that he can talk everyone down and make everyone not worried about it. And he's so good here. I think he's going to be nominated for an Oscar because this is a weird year where this movie that premiered on HBO is going to be eligible for an Academy Award. And so I think he's going to be nominated. I really do. It's incredible.
It's crazy. I haven't heard about this. I feel like I'm even more out of the loop than usual because of the weirdness of the times.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. Like it's one of those wonderful based on a true story thrillers where like you just can't believe that this really happened. Like and the way it happened, and they fudged with it a little bit. You know, they took liberties and stuff, but the way that this whole thing was exposed and what happened afterwards, it's just one of those things where like it's like watching a car crash and you just can't not look at it. It's incredible. It's incredible the way these people got away with it. And I think this movie is saying a lot of very interesting, complex things. It also has Allison Janney in it, who's really good, and Ray Romano, who's become this like he's having the second wind of his career. And it's really interesting. The characters that he's playing in this late part of his career is really, really interesting. And I've been very much enjoying watching it for sure.
Cool. This is exciting to me in a very different way than the other one sounded.
And it's on HBO right now. So if you have HBO, you can watch it right now. Right now.
I don't.
I also watched a show called Working Moms. I believe season 4 is out. They're all on Netflix. This is it's a Canadian comedy created by Catherine Reitman, who you might recognize if you watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. She plays one of the Maureen Ponderosa, if that is recognizable to you. If you watch a lot of It's Always Sunny, it will be. But it's basically about like 30-something mothers and just the shit that they're having to deal with. And it's really funny. I love Catherine Reitman's sense of humor. It's it's like vulgar, but in an adorable, hilarious way. All 4 of these women are very fascinating characters, and like they kind of across the seasons they kind of come in and out of importance depending on what the seasons are doing. And they're like short. I think they're like 8 episode 10. Well, the first one it looks like was 13, but I think this latest one was only 8, and they're 30-minute. Matt, let me tell you something about me. The 30-minute comedy or the 30-minute drama, the 30-minute anything has become my new favorite thing. Because it's just so quick, right? Like you just get in there, watch one, you're done, and you can move on to the next thing. And like we watched all of season 4 in a day because there were 8 episodes and they were half an hour. So yeah, I mean, we watched TV for 4 hours. Don't judge me, but I just love 30 minutes.
But think how many Quibi episodes you could fit into that chunk of time.
Touche. Poor Quibi. Quibi's not doing well, believe it or not.
No, I believe it.
And the last thing I'm going to talk about is a show called Dead to Me, which is a 30-minute drama on Netflix. Season 2 just came out this past week. It stars Christina Applegate and Linda Cardellini as 2 women like involved in. It's really hard to explain the show. So Christina Applegate's husband was killed in a hit and run, and Linda Cardellini's was involved in it. and so was her husband, played by James Marsters. And it's this really weird show, Matt, where it's like irreverent and funny, but also like deeply dramatic and disturbing at the same time. And it's really twisty and turny, and like if you ever think like you're not enjoying it, like 5 minutes later something crazy happens and you're like, nope, never mind, I love this. I don't know if I recommend it. Like that's like it's weird. Like I enjoyed watching it, but I don't know if I would be like, oh, you got to prioritize this show. I don't know. I love James Marsden. Like the actors are all great. Like Christina Applegate, Linda Cardellini, and James Marsden are just great actors, and just seeing them have fun on TV is enjoyable. But I don't know. I don't know if I like. It's tough. It's very confusing for me. Sometimes the tone management goes so crazy that it loses me a little bit, where you just can't cut from an absurdist scene to the most dramatic moment ever and expect me to keep up. But I don't know. We watched it all, the second season all already. So obviously we liked it.
It's funny because like even your lukewarm recommendation seems to imply that it has like at least they're doing something different, which counts a lot for me. So
yeah, I'd say that.
Cool.
This isn't like, I think it has so many twists and turns to it that I wouldn't even know like what to call it. Like what genre is this? It's definitely a drama. It's definitely a comedy, but like, what is it? I don't know. It's hard to peg down, and that's one of the things I like about it.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah. So I've watched a bunch of other stuff, but I'm not going to talk about it for 25 more minutes. I could. I've been watching a lot. My Star Trek rewatch is still going, but it's going pretty slow. I'm only like halfway through season 1.
Okay, of the original.
Yeah, of the original still. I've just got to a 2-parter that I really enjoyed, which is apparently the only 2-parter in the history of that show, which is crazy because I think The Next Generation has like 12 2-parters. Like they really went nuts with it.
Yeah.
But and I enjoyed those. Like there's every once in a while you'll get to an episode that I recognize or like is like culturally important, and I'm like, yeah, fuck yeah, this is great. And then sometimes I'll get to some where I'm just like, ugh, I don't know if I like this.
Yeah, that's the weird thing about. I feel like this is true about all old TV to some degree. Is that you get to, you're just like, oh, they just hadn't figured out what they were doing, like as a medium yet. Like, you know, we talk. I mean, the first season of TNG is not something I would wish on anyone, and TNG is something that I just love immensely. So yeah. But I will continue to update you on that progress. I'm interested to see how the show changes once it gets into season 2, because if I'm understanding the history correctly, like even after the first season, they were already fighting against cancellation, and like I think both seasons were renewed thanks to like some of the first fandom brigades ever that like rode into the station. So I wonder, it is a show that goes down in budget every season, and I'm wondering what the second season looks like. Well, but we'll get there. Yeah, I look forward to you finishing that, and then I want to get a full report on the whole original series of Star Trek.
All right, I will do that in maybe like 3 months. we'll
good.
See. At the rate it's going, we'll see. All right. That is all we had for you this week. If you have any opinions on Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which I'm sure you do, feel free to reach out to us via email at doofmedia@gmail.com or on Twitter @doofmedia. And if any of the stuff we talked about, if you want to have any opinions on that stuff, or just tell us, what has your quarantine viewing been like? What have you guys been watching? I'm curious what you're filling your time with, if you have extra time. Some people like Matt, I think this is actually less time than normal, but some people like me have way more time.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird how I have less time, but yes.
Yeah.
Cool. If you're not already subscribed to this podcast, we encourage you to do so and ensure you never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else podcasts can be found.
And you can find this and all of our shows over at our website, doofmedia.com. There's a ton of stuff going on right now, Matt. It's crazy. I made a whole thread yesterday about all the different shows we have, and it took a while to make that thread. That's how many things we got. But I guess the biggest piece of news for us is that we finished a show this week. We finished We've Got Ward. It's over. We the book is over, and now the show is over as well. But we are still going strong with Kingslingers, and next week we will be starting book 4 of that series, Above the Dark Tower.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really enjoying the Dark Tower stuff. If you haven't checked that out yet, I mean, I'm loving it just immensely so far. Scott obviously loves it enough to do a whole show about it. So consider starting on the Dark Tower and joining us on that journey.
Yeah. And this week's episode, we actually had a special guest. We had Scott Wampler from Birth Movies Death that guested on the show and just talked about his history with King and the Dark Tower and his opinions on it. It was a great time. So if you are really into the movie scene, you might recognize him. And I would, even if you're not following along with all the other episodes, which you should be, but even if you're not, I think that's a great one to check out if you just want to listen to a one-off to get a feel for what the show is. So check out Kingslingers. That episode is up right now.
Sure, yeah.
And if you like what we do here and want to support us, consider becoming a patron of Doof Media. Head on over to patreon.com/Doof Media. You'll already be going there to vote, right? You'll already be there to vote yes on Into the Spider-Verse. And while you're doing that, you might as well just pledge $1 a month. And you get a bunch of new cool stuff. You get bonus content. You get access to our Discord. You get access to vote in our monthly book clubs. All kinds of cool shit. Right, Matt?
That's right. You get a whole bunch of new friends on the Discord, too.
Yeah.
And, it's weird times right now. So if you're not able to support us, then it would also be really awesome if you would head on over to Apple Podcasts or really any of these other platforms that exist and leave us a 5-star rating and a review. Every review helps us get more exposure, of course, and introduces new people to the content that we're making here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that is it for this week. Matt, it was a pleasure talking about a wonderful movie with you. I love when we have a movie that we both just really, really love. It makes the conversation so much more enjoyable.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, hopefully that'll be the case next week when we are discussing the 1980 South African film Breaker Morant. So that's next week on the show. I don't think either. Have you seen this movie?
No,
I've never seen it either. So we'll find out if we like this movie next week. So we'll see you then.
My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say. My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say.